So the modern day horror film genre is a mixed bag, to say the very least. On the one hand, we have great young directors making incredibly bold and unique films, built to terrorize their audiences on both a visual and mental level. Films like Hereditary, which takes the idea of grief and family struggles and matches that with a typical supernatural story that both uses innovative directing as well as nuanced writing to create an experience that sticks with an audience long after a viewing. Then you have films like Robert Eggers' The Lighthouse, which truly isolate the audience, allowing them to feel the dread of loneliness, while also giving the fine cast of Robert Pattinson and Willem Dafoe a chance to elevate the story with all-time great performances. These are just two examples of great modern horror films that press the envelope for what it means to create films in this genre. But like every part of the film industry, the horror genre is also stuffed to the brim with fluff, unoriginal, generic, MCU-like factory-made films that seem to reuse the same formula over and over and over. This was a trend seen for years in the slasher genre with endless Halloween and Friday the 13th movies, and now it's something we see in this sort of haunt subgenre of horror with the Conjuring universe. I know that's a very negative note to introduce the topic of this video, but the Conjuring universe has built a massive beacon of success in this genre, as well as a perfect example of every issue that I have with the current landscape of cinema. I seek to outline both the highs and the lows of this franchise, which is why this video is called Ranking Every Single Conjuring Universe Movie. Airing my grievances and giving flowers out when I can. I love horror films, and I love some of these films, so I'm excited to jump right into it. I remember when this film was first announced, it was marketed as the scariest true story of all time. The studio really built up this idea that this film would be one of the most terrifying things ever created, definitely for this Conjuring universe, and with new and mostly unknown director Michael Chavez at the helm, who seemed to be incredibly passionate about this project. There was some hope that maybe they were onto something, but no, they were not. The Curse of La Llorona is by far the most forgettable film in this universe, so forgettable that I almost forgot to include it here. Like seriously, I wrote the entire script for this video before seeing a random clip on Instagram, recommending something about this movie, and I was like, wow, I completely forgot that that was a thing. And had to pretty much remake my whole list, but luckily it's number 9, so I didn't have to shuffle around too much. The film has its moments where it could be a little bit scary in the general sense, but it's nothing that really is remarkable in any way. And you could definitely tell from a filmmaking point of view that this is a fairly new director getting his feet wet, working on a large-scale production like this. The script is a mess, and the overall idea of a ghost demon thing targeting kids is something that's been done to death and done so much better in other films. And overall, this is a film that just doesn't offer much to talk about, so I'm not gonna talk about it any longer. For years, I hoped and prayed that Warner Brothers wouldn't go ahead and make a third Conjuring film without series creator James Wan, and when they announced plans to do exactly that, and to use the same director Michael Chavez from La Llorona, I was extremely concerned, and yeah, my concerns were kind of warranted. This is another film where I seriously just don't remember anything from it. I mean, it's the definition of forgettable, which is insane when you look at the quality of the first 2 films in this trilogy. I remember this film not being anywhere near as scary as pretty much any other film in this list, and it had a story that on paper should definitely work. I mean, a courtroom-esque drama that's also mixed as a horror film about a guy who committed a murder while possessed and used that as his defense in court. I mean, that's an incredibly excellent premise, grounded in reality, that for some reason just does not work in this film at all. It just comes off as so ridiculous here, poorly paced, and overall just really, really boring. I was really, really disappointed with this movie at release, and ultimately I feel the same exact way today, which is why I will say right now, Warner Brothers, do not make this movie without James Wan in the director's chair. I'm gonna keep on saying this in this video, but this was an extremely forgettable movie. So forgettable that it made its sequel so much harder to enjoy because I just could not remember anything that happened here. The Nun in The Conjuring 2 is one of the more truly terrifying horror movie villains that we've gotten in the last 20 years, delivering nightmares to people young and old across the world, so it stood for good reason that Warner Brothers would decide to want to build a franchise around that character and make its own movies around it. This film just never reaches the levels of terror that original Conjuring film did that included the character. The idea of a monastery being haunted by an evil demon nun on paper should be cool, and including ancient artifacts like the blood of Jesus Christ is something that allowed the film to have its own unique flavor in this universe, feeling more supernatural and almost sci-fi-like than anything else in this world. But that also made the film feel less grounded in reality than the other films in this universe, being the first major story in this world to not be based off some sort of historical legend or true story. Because of that, this film drags on through its runtime, and besides delivering a few decent scares, it just never really accomplishes anything memorable at all. That brings me to the newest film of this franchise and the sequel to The Nun, The Nun 2. Also directed by now series regular Michael Chavez, and if you could say anything about him as a director, he has definitely improved at every single film that he's made, which is typically what you want to see, so good job on that. The performances are strong, and I really liked some of the cinematography here, and the film definitely delivers a couple unique scares. The third act kind of falls apart a little bit and becomes a little bit too goofy for my taste, and the script lacks a sense of uniqueness that I would have liked to have seen. I also felt like this movie felt way too unnecessary, with audiences already knowing where the Nun's story would end up in the eventual Conjuring 2, and because of having two prequel movies, it just all sort of feels redundant. Overall, though, definitely the strongest out of this bottom tier of film so far, and one that, although I'll probably forget in a week, was certainly entertaining in the moment. Annabelle Comes Home is definitely the worst of the Annabelle trilogy, but still a really solid film that attempted to fully use the weirdness of the Warrens and their real-life museum of horrors to create a horror film centered around their daughter and their household as a whole. I really like McKenna Grace's performance here, and the inclusion of all these different demonic forces that the Warrens have encountered over time offered some unique scares and visual horror elements. Some definitely worked more than others, but I really like the ferryman, and yeah, why not give him his own film at this point, since everybody's getting their own film. The Annabelle doll itself, although not nearly as terrifying as its first appearance in the first Conjuring film, still has an unsettling presence to it that carries this film. There are some fun uses of the camera and lighting, and the film also captures the sense of claustrophobia, which I always love in my horror movies. It's just, you know, at this point, kind of generic and forgettable. The first attempt at making a spin-off to the Conjuring films and truly creating this into a larger franchise, Annabelle 1 is a strong horror movie, standing at the top of this generic formula of haunted house type stories. The film is generic and it doesn't stand up as being one of the all-time great horror movies, but the film is also extremely scary to me, being what I feel is like the most small budget type movie in this franchise, feeling really tiny and basic in many ways, which forced the crew to put more effort when designing a lot of these scares and the production as a whole. The elevator sequence is one that I still think about all the time, especially when I'm writing my own films and when I've ever worked on anything horror related. It's something I've always kept on the back of my mind, like that's kind of what I want to capture here. I also think the Annabelle doll itself and the mythology around the demon behind it are done pretty well, and ultimately, although the story here is sort of forgettable, I think it's very enjoyable as a whole, and one of the better films in the universe. Okay, now onto the top 3. I truthfully think all 3 of these films are great, and they're the only films on this list that I would give a 4 out of 5 or better.
I dreamed I held you in my arms.
I am a massive fan of David Sandberg, and I think he's one of the better filmmakers working today, one of the more underrated filmmakers working today, and I've loved just about every movie he's done, including the 2 Shazam movies. I also credit him with his YouTube channel, in which he makes fantastic videos to help out indie filmmakers making films at home, both with advice on equipment and the filmmaking process itself. I mean, he is just absolutely great, and I've watched pretty much everything he's ever made. Annabelle 2, in my opinion, is his best film, and it's a great movie. It definitely holds close to the established James Wan model of horror films that this universe follows, but there's something so haunting about the cinematography and the direction here, with the entire film being filled with a sense of dread and terror. Its dark sound design, great use of the Annabelle myth, and strong performances from the kid actors. This film allows us to see this horrible and terrifying event from the eyes of the most vulnerable of us, the most vulnerable of our people, of our society, and the easiest to be terrified. I mean, children. Because of that, I think this film is really, really strong and definitely not forgettable like a lot of the other films in this list. For a director who had only made one major Hollywood feature up to this point, there is a poise and a sense of confidence here that truly displays Sandberg's natural ability in this genre, and I'm so excited to see what he does next.
For I can tell, falling in love with you.
The Conjuring 2 is maybe the best horror sequel ever made, with James Wan, in my opinion, the best horror filmmaker alive today, and one of the best and most underrated directors we have, crafting one of the most haunting experiences of the 21st century. The film yet again follows the Warrens, played by Vera Farmiga and the always charming Patrick Wilson, as they travel to England to help a family that's been horrified by a haunt. This film introduces an element to this franchise that I love, the media. Having the media tackle this case and decide whether it's real or a hoax added an element that made this film feel more like a real-life story and connected to the actual sort of real-life story that this film is based on. This film also introduces us to the nun character, who is unbelievably terrifying, and the scene that takes place at the Warrens' house is so brilliantly done, as well as the opening of this movie. This film is one of the best horror openings, I think, ever. It's really, really good and effective. This movie has some of the best uses of atmosphere that the genre has to offer, as well as some incredibly great uses of music supervision. Like, y'all made Elvis scary. How do you make Elvis scary? But this film isn't solely focused on the horror. It's also dedicated to telling a tight and emotional family drama with likable characters that ultimately make you care for them and feel horrible for them within the experiences that they're having in the movie. But it also helps to deliver a better emotional payoff by the third act that you actually remember. This film does it brilliantly, but there is one other film on this list that does it a little bit better. film that started it all. James Wan, after delivering the horror genre with two massive franchises with Saw and then Insidious, decided,
I'm not finished with you!
And brought in his absolute masterpiece in The Conjuring. A film that manages to be both horrifying in its atmosphere, its cinematography, its set design, its groundedness in reality with real-life figures, its smart direction, great performances, superb sound design, haunting imagery, emotional screenplay, unique color grading. I mean, should I go on? This is one of the best horror films of this generation and created a mold of haunt-type films that's been reused and redone about 1,500 times the last decade, but never as well as this singular project gets it. This film is not just a horror movie, but a beautiful story about motherhood and family and love. It includes creative horror set pieces like the hide and clap game, as well as my favorite moment when one of the kids sees something behind a door and stares at it in terror. The audience can't see what she sees, but we know through her terror and through other experiences in the movie that something must be there, right in frame, right in front of us, but we can't see it. But yet we still don't want to look at the screen. We still want to cover our eyes because we're waiting for something to pop out, and nothing ever does. It's just a scene that's designed on atmosphere and fear of the unknown, of what we can't see but others are seeing, and it's so brilliant, and god damn it, James Wan, you're so good. This scene shows how great Wan is at capturing terror by using a sense of isolation in his storytelling, and I fucking love it. This is one of my favorite horror movies ever made, and it's no wonder why this franchise has grown to be what it is, because this movie is a masterpiece, and usually franchises are built from masterpieces, and usually that masterpiece ends up being the best film of the franchise even decades and years later, which is why this film is #1. And there has not been a single film in this franchise yet that totally recaptured what made this film so perfect, and you know what? That's okay. So that's my list. What do you guys think? Leave your rankings down below. Make sure to like this video and subscribe for more. Make sure to turn on notifications to see everything as I post it, and I will see you guys in the next video.